In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
Avery Moore Kloss is our guest this week on Money Tales. Have you ever been in a place where you knew deep down something had to change, but fear kept holding you back? That's exactly where Avery found herself, watching her husband, an entrepreneur at heart, slowly lose his spark in the corporate grind post-pandemic. Avery candidly shares how she wrestled with the fear of losing financial stability, realizing that she was the one holding him back from his dreams. In this episode, we dive into the moment she finally said to her husband, "Just quit the job. We'll figure it out." Let me tell you more about Avery. She's the founder and lead creator of Folktale Studio. As a journalist, educator, entrepreneur, podcast host, and award-winning radio documentarian, Avery's passion is in helping others capture their unique stories through audio. Additionally, Avery hosts the Grown Up podcast, where she dives deep into the unconventional career journeys of her guests, exploring how they've navigated the twists and turns of the working world. It's a show about finding your way, even if that way looks nothing like what you expected.
Here are 3 key money topics Avery hits on in this conversation. First, how starting from scratch, Avery forged her path to becoming a successful entrepreneur. She wasn't guided by business books or coursework. Instead, she built her expertise in the trenches, where every decision carries weight and failure isn't a theoretical concept. Second, discovering an unexpected strength in her marriage. While she and her husband have completely different money mindsets, they've transformed what could have been a source of conflict into a win-win for their careers and their relationship. And third, the pride she has from achieving something she once thought was impossible, becoming her family's primary breadwinner. For the last few years, Avery's been the force that's kept their dreams alive, creating the financial foundation that has allowed her husband to chase his startup vision. Now it's our pleasure to bring you Avery Moore Kloss's Money Tales.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager.
Sandy, this past weekend, I had a friend over for 2 nights spending the time with us, which is so special. You can go grab dinners and hikes and all these things, but there is something about the morning coffee and the nighttime, just letting it go.
No pressure of time.
Yeah, and just always get into some great conversations. And this friend had gone through a tough divorce that was finalized 4 years ago. I knew financial challenges with her husband played an important part in the divorce, both before, leading to, and then during the process. So I asked her just a pretty open-ended question about how did the financial downside with her husband happen. It was special to get into a conversation like that. And I was really, hey, if this is something that you don't want to talk about, we don't need to. But it's Money Tales. When you open that door, I think she really appreciated the opportunity to tell her story. And Sandy, it was a crazy story. There's so many aspects to it, but one in particular that really impacted me, and I just want to share it with listeners and you. They had very early in their marriage, without really talking about it, her husband paid the mortgage and she paid for other things just to kind of keep it balanced.
They just chose their own roles within how they were going to maintain the finances of the family, which is pretty common.
Pretty common. And they both had really good jobs and everything's good. One day, many years later into the marriage, they get a knock on the door and their house is being foreclosed on. He had stopped paying the mortgage because he had run out of money.
And he never said anything.
He never said anything. It was unbelievable. Now, again, my friend could have stepped in and said, I would have. They had a really wonderful marriage and relationship, and she would have stepped in. I mean, I'm sure it would have been many hard conversations, but he couldn't have that conversation. And as a result, she and they wanted to keep this home. So there was big, not just paying the interest expense and the mortgage payments that were past due, the penalties. It was basically twice had she just stepped in and paid. And oh God, what a missed, sad opportunity that he didn't feel comfortable having money conversations. And this is someone who doesn't have judgment. I mean, would have been serious and would have said, we got to figure this out and you've got financial issues. But he couldn't come to terms with sharing that.
We know from prior Money Tales conversations that happens. People get into their own heads around money and it can be really hard and they start feeling some deeply negative emotions that can prevent them from having those conversations. But I'm so sorry that happened to your friend and she was able to ultimately keep the house.
She was, after dealing with the separation and the divorce. They actually were decent friends. But yeah, isn't that just such a good lesson and a reminder of maybe there's opportunities for all of us. Don't make assumptions. Try and bring in the conversations around money and check in.
I think another helpful lesson from that story is that if you're dividing these money responsibilities with your partner, it's always a good idea to check in, have regular check-ins to see how things are going. That sort of forces open the conversations to make sure everything is on track and everyone is informed of what they need to be informed of.
That's a great suggestion, Sandy. Well, it's my pleasure to pivot our conversation to our guest today, Avery Moore Kloss. It is fantastic to be talking with you on the Money Tales podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's not often that I guest. I'm usually the producer or the host, so it's a good flip.
The tables have turned.
Yeah.
Well, Avery, let's start with your story. Would you please introduce yourself and share a couple major turning points that have made a lasting impact on who you are today?
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. My name's Avery Moore Kloss. I have a number of professional roles. I guess at the moment, I'm a freelance podcast producer. I run my own podcast production company. I teach at the university in my local area in Canada, and I'm also the podcaster in residence at that university too. So I give people advice about podcasting all the time, and I help students and staff and faculty record their own shows.
I love the sound of that, podcaster in residence.
I know, me too.
Isn't it fancy? A few key moments. I've really been thinking about this, and I think a lot of my life has been really centered around a decision I made as a kid that I wanted to be a journalist. And it's actually really bizarre to me now. Tomorrow, my child turns 7. And when I was 7, I decided I was going to be a journalist because I had a teacher of mine who said, you're a really good actor. You're very imaginative and a good writer. You should be a journalist. And like, what 7-year-old knows what that means?
It's stuck.
I know. You have someone you trust says something about career, and sometimes you just are like, yep, there's a platform. I'm going to hit that. I spent much of my child and teenagehood obsessed with, I'm going to be a journalist. High school was not for fun. It was to get good grades, to get into the school I wanted to go to be a journalist. So I went to a journalism school in Ottawa, Canada called Carleton. Very close to the end, they decided that long form audio was what inspired me the most. And I went to a school in the States called the SALT Institute for Documentary Studies. And I took a very specific 4-month, this is also my first introduction into tuition in America.
Oh, gosh.
Oh my gosh. Welcome.
Because that 4 months was the same price as 2 years of my undergrad in Canada. I got back to Canada, I had all these skills, and there was not a market for long form audio in Canada at the time. This is 2010. So I worked in daily news for many years as a reporter. I don't know if you know anything about being a daily news reporter, but you have to have gumption and you have to be able to put up walls that don't let all the bad that's coming at you all the time seep into your personal life. I don't have those things. Being the first on the scene at a stabbing and going to a murder trial from beginning to end, These are things I could do, I was trained to do, but just slowly they were chipping away at my soul. Probably 6 or 7 years in, I quit journalism and I went into marketing. It was a big pivot. It's a big part of my life that I've really worked through now. Slam the door on this. I'm never doing that again. I did marketing for about 7 or 8 years until all of a sudden, right before the pandemic, there was this market for long form audio again called podcasting. And so right before the pandemic, I launched my own podcasting production business. From the pandemic, podcasting was one of the silver linings for me, is that podcasting just exploded. I find myself running this business 5, 6 years in with really no background in entrepreneurial, how to run a business, all this stuff, but it's been going incredibly well. And I've been super lucky. And I have an incredible partner and an incredible kid who support me along the way. So yeah, it's been really fun. But I talk a lot about careers on my own podcast. That's where I headed with that. And it's based on this idea that I'm like going to get this job, then I'm going to be happy forever. And then that's just not how it goes. And that's okay. And it's a roller coaster.
Thanks for bringing that up. It is a roller coaster. Did you grow up in Ottawa?
No, I grew up in Toronto. As a kid, we lived in the suburbs for a bit. And then I grew up in downtown Toronto from about 10 to when I moved out. So the real Toronto experience.
You talk about being influenced at 7 years old to have chosen a career. I don't think I knew the word career, even thinking about that at 7. I'm curious, was this something that your family talked about when you were growing up? How did this singular focus and drive start so young?
Reflecting on it actually for this podcast, I really thought about, did my family care about money? And I think the answer is, it was really clear to me my whole life that all that was important is that you did something that you liked. My dad was, and is still, an architect, and he worked 14-hour days, but he actually really loved the work he did. That was very much drilled into us. We actually really don't care what you do. It was clear we had to go to college or university, specifically university, which is a piece, but it was very much a time of, if that's what you want to do and that's what your heart desires, let's figure out how to make it happen. Very much like the two of you. I grew up with 3. I was middle though.
Oh, nice. Youngest here.
You complete the set.
I think we've got youngest, oldest, middle.
That's right.
We're the perfect set. My eldest sister is an artist. She is a visual artist, has always been a visual artist. And my youngest sister is a big corporate event planner, which is just so perfectly suited to exactly who she is. And journalist and talking and putting myself in the spotlight as the middle child is where we've ended up, in a good place. So I always felt very supported in that goal, to the point, I think, even where my parents, when I quit journalism, were like, whoa, are we okay? And what is happening? Because for the first 26 years of my life, I was intent on journalism.
Avery, that makes me wonder, when did you start to become aware of money and the role money played in your life?
My parents were always very open about money. I always knew when we were in overdraft. But other than that, we really didn't talk that much about money. To not really think about money that much is such an incredible privilege, to not have to live where it's like, when is the next money coming? We were pretty middle class in the way that we'll find a way, but there wasn't this endless, bottomless pit of money for whatever your heart desires. When I was maybe 14, there was a chance at my arts high school to go on exchange to an arts high school in Austria. I was like, can I go? And they were like, yes, but we don't have Austria money sitting around. So I got a job when I was 14. Their deal was, if I could make half of it, they would try and match my half. So I got a job at the Eaton Centre, which is the downtown mall in Toronto. And I folded sweaters until I made enough money to pay for half of Austria. And honestly, that's the first time I'd ever thought of it. I had a job from 14 until today, but I was very privileged. My needs were met, and we just really didn't talk about it that much.
Tell us about that feeling that you were able to match what your parents were going to put up so that you could go on this adventure that was so important to you. Tell us how that felt and what it taught you.
I'd been a camp counselor, so I'd made money before. I think it was an interesting moment for me because I grew up in a very urban area. I took the subway to school, 14 stops every day from grade 7. So when I was 12 until I graduated. But this idea of all of a sudden, I had my own thing. I had a paycheck. I worked at this clothing store. And my mom used to say, you're going to $10 jean jacket your way to nothing. I think they could have just said, if you want to pay for Austria, sure. But they always use this, we'll match it to show, do this work and we will help, but we're not just going to give you money for everything you want. I think that was important to them, that we understood they would help us, but it was on us to make sure that we knew how to have those skills, how to create money for ourselves. I do remember at 14 having that little bit of independence. I knew all these people nobody knew, all my work friends. I could buy clothes. That was kind of new for me as well.
So how did you take these lessons into your adult life? You're studying journalism and you are working in a daily paper doing soul-sucking work for you. How is that playing out in your personal financial life as you were launching as an adult?
I've lived much of my life saying money doesn't matter. That was something I always said. I don't care about money. I don't do my job for money. Obviously, I need money to survive. I had this very specific feeling that if I do something for money, it sullies it. I should do things for passion. I should do things to help others. I should do things because I feel like it's making a difference in the world. I don't do things for money. That felt like, oh, that's not what this is for. And the interesting journey that I've had recently, having my own business, and on top of that, having my husband quit his job. So for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been our sole income creator on a freelance business budget, has been a really interesting journey that I feel like I'm still really very much in the middle of. People who get into journalism, I think generally come from this idea of storytelling and a passion for connecting others. Asking for a raise was a monumental, enormous deal for me. Heart pounding. This is so gross that I would ask for more money. And I'm really trying to get myself out of that as an adult human. My family was very giving. My parents were both big volunteers. The goal shouldn't be how much money can I amass? How many people can I help? How many people can I connect? Do I like what I'm doing? Am I happy? I think having a child has really changed that. I'm still figuring it out.
The way you've been living your life in accordance with the values that your parents taught you to have and that you've instilled for yourself makes sense. How do you think the negative aspect of money crept into that framework?
I think the only time money ever came up was conflict. My dad worked long hours, loved his job. Would he ever ask for a raise? Not a chance. That's just not who he is. So money always only really came up in a conflict scenario. If the money is all there, if everything is handled, there's no conflict. To me, money was kind of an afterthought. And if it was a forethought, it was a conflict thought. In reality, money is power, and money gives you the freedom and the power to do certain things. That's just not how we talked about money as kids. My grandfather had a 9-to-5, regimented, showed up at that same office every day. And my dad was like, I don't want to do that. And my mom had a single mother for most of her life who had 3 jobs. Money was never a thing that you talked about. You don't ask for money. My mom would always say when they'd come home with, you got to sell wrapping paper to raise money for the school. She'd be like, what's the minimum you need? I'll just give it to you. Don't go out asking our neighbors for money. We're a not talk about money family. You don't ask someone what they make, whatever it is. That, I think, in my adult life has really made it hard for me. As a business owner, it's so money centric. To have to think in money is not naturally where my brain goes. I'm like, what's my passion project? Let's do that. And my husband will be like, what's the budget for the passion project? If you're taking 3 hours off this, where are you making that back? And I'm like, I didn't think of that.
I really appreciate this framing of money came up in your youth around conflict. So you've got this overlay, and now you're embracing that they can coexist, passion and money. And it sounds like your husband is a great partner in this. Tell us about these conversations that you're having. How do you make them productive where it doesn't feel where your chest is getting tight? No, we're talking about, I want those 3 hours to just be creative. How do you guys handle this?
We've been together for 13, 14 years. And I feel like we're still on this journey a little bit. We're very good at talking about money. We're very good at setting a budget. Are we good at following that budget to a T? Not quite. But he comes from such a different mindset as me, and him and all his siblings. There's always more money, and they did not grow up with wealth at all. They were all taught to be salespeople. In my family, it was like, if my dad loses his job, what will we do? What if the money goes away? And in his family, it was, you lose your job. There's like 8,000 other things you can do. You do manual labor till you figure it out. He was very much raised with this. It's just money. There's always more money. You just go out and figure out how to get it. So we come from very different places. So it's always been super interesting to me that I like thrift and scrounge and compare prices.
You're a thrifter.
Oh, I loved thrifting. I think everything I am wearing on my body is secondhand. I always joke, if you show him 3 things and you're like, which one should we get? He will always choose the most expensive one without even knowing which one was the most expensive one. So we struggle a bit with that. He's a spender. He'd rather buy something quality that's going to last. And I'd probably rather, I guess, spend the same amount of money, but have 5 versions of it that all broke. It's such an interesting part of marriage is to take 2 money mindsets and like try and make them work together. And we do an okay job and we're getting better. We've made some big shifts in recent years that has really put us in a place that's much better now that we're both entrepreneurs. We have this conversation in a much smarter way now, but it's been a journey for sure.
Tell us about that.
After I quit journalism, I worked in marketing for a bit and I did kind of own my own business, but it wasn't a business I had full control of. It was a license deal, a franchise in marketing. And he's always had a job. He was very much like, I'm going to climb this ladder. I'm going to get to the top. Let's see how far we can push this salary. And I very much was like, I just want to do something I love and we'll figure out the rest later. Traditionally, I worked from home. I worked for myself. He had this big job. It gave me the freedom to try it out and stumble and make mistakes in entrepreneurship. Between the two of us, he is the much more entrepreneurial person. He's just such an entrepreneur at his core. Other than like a couple businesses he started when he was younger, he's never done it. After having a kid, after the pandemic, we were just at this spot where he reached the top of the ladder. And then he was like, well, this doesn't look fun. What am I supposed to do from here? Waiting for other people to give him opportunity was just something he didn't want to do anymore. I had started my podcast production business. I had this other business on the side. And for many years, I feel shameful about this, to be honest, had really discouraged him from starting a business because I was like, but what are we going to do without your salary? And I actually regret it now. I think he would tell you everything timed out right. When he started his business was the right time. For his own journey, I was like, just do it. I will cover us, quit the job, start the business. We'll figure it out. And that was a really scary thing for me to say because I don't come from that mindset. That does not come naturally to me. For me to say that to him is like me swallowing something to be like, yep, just like quit it. Just quit the job. Like I'm like forcing myself through this support of his entrepreneurial journey.
How did you get to that spot? Because based on the story you've told us, I feel that emotion you're describing. How did you get yourself to like suck that air in?
People who have this entrepreneurial spirit built in, I could see it slowly chipping away at him. He's an ideas guy. He's in a business going like, what if we tried this and that, and then we circled those two together, we make a partnership with this. And pre-COVID, I think his workplace was very much like, yeah, try it. Post-COVID, that's a risk, which of course, that's what all businesses did. Watching him lose this passion for a thing he loved so much because he just had all these ideas and he could see the fix for it. But in a corporate atmosphere post-COVID, it just wasn't working. Watching him struggle and knowing in my heart, he just has to do the entrepreneurial thing that he's always wanted to do. Also coming to terms with the fact what actually has been holding him back has been me, because I'm the one who's scared. Somebody has to have a job here. I'm an entrepreneur. I was still figuring it out. I wasn't making enough to cover us. And I never imagined that I could make enough to cover us. Watching his light go out a bit through COVID was really hard for him, but also really hard for me to watch and know that I was the one holding him back from that. Also having a kid, I wanted her to see him on fire for what he does. At some point, he was just unhappy. And in my family, we used to call me the dream crusher. I'm really trying to get out of dream crusher because he's the dreamer. I'm the dream crusher. He had this idea. I think you should just do it. I'm just trying to set aside my anxiety that I've built up about what are we going to do without his salary. For the past 3 or almost 4 years, he started a startup. And it's been so incredible to watch him build this business. We have such different styles. I'm like solopreneur for life. I work by myself, for myself. I don't delegate well. Week 2, he hired somebody. He took on a partner. Their 4th staff member just started today. So there's 6 of them now. He started taking a salary this year. So for him, I've been so happy to see him blossom and bloom. It's honestly been so beautiful. Startups are a roller coaster. One day he'll be like, it's all going down. It's never going to work. And then literally the next day he'll be like, this is the best thing I ever did. It's such a crazy roller coaster. So I'm so proud of him for that. And on my side, I'm so proud of myself that actually I have fully floated us for 3 to 4 years as the sole income earner, which I never thought I could do. And we've made adjustments. Obviously, we downsized. So we had a detached house with a big yard. He convinced me almost a year ago to date that we didn't need to come home and mow the lawn and weed and worry about when the retaining wall was going to fall over and all these things. So we moved to a townhouse, what used to be a senior's condo. And it's amazing. It's quiet. Someone salts my front steps. It's got a big backyard that nobody uses but my 6-year-old. It's actually the best thing we ever did. But I was like, we will leave this house over my cold, dead body. And here I am, still alive in a townhouse across town. And it's so much better. We talk all the time about how like just taking that load off of all the things we were paying for this house, it was drowning us as two entrepreneurs. So it was a scary leap to take. I'm such a big proponent now to like downsize. Do you really need that big house? Do you really need that huge yard? You don't most of the time.
Avery, this is incredible. And I'm wondering about your experience when your husband stepped away to start his startup adventure. That put a lot of pressure on you that you mentioned. How did you handle that? At that point, you'd been an entrepreneur for a while.
I've had to do a lot of internal work, a lot of therapy. It's a different priority. I'm a podcaster, I'm a storyteller and a human-centered connection builder. And now I'm like, no, I'm actually a business owner and I have bills to pay. And I need to make sure that the little thing where I've set my payday on my calendar, that money actually makes it into our account. It's been a shift based on the way I was doing business before, which was just doing what I love to do and then being like, oh, money came in? So interesting. Now I have to have a budget and I have to think about expenditures. I hate doing taxes. I always leave it to the very last minute. I'm on a journey. This is the first year ever, Sandy and Cammie. I have had all my bookkeeping done by the end of the year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. 37. Can't figure out how to bookkeep.
It doesn't matter. This isn't an age thing. It's all hard and we chip away.
If I look at where I am now based on where I was when he first quit his job, it's definitely a different place. I've learned how to work through the anxiety. I've learned how to set rates that are appropriate, that are based on market value and based on my skill level and the years of experience I have. So the me from 3 years ago is not the me of today. In a freelance business, to make enough money for a family of 3 in Canada, I know that your cost of living is high in California. It's incredibly high in Canada. The cost of living here is intense. He really picked up that as well in the way that all of a sudden, all I could do is run a business. And I come home so tired. Somehow, all of a sudden, I can't clean a house and do dishes and make dinner and run a business. And so he took on all that stuff so gracefully. Now we're back to a point where like we're very much equal in work and home. It's honestly been a struggle. And I'm proud of myself for where I've gotten to now. I feel pretty secure in the work that I do and how much money I make.
You should be. Now, you said you don't have a background on how to run a business, quote unquote. What's your advice looking back to yourself or someone who's thinking of starting their own business, who feels that same way? How can I do it? I don't know how to do this. What's your advice to them?
It's so funny because I talk to my students about this all the time, because I do think one thing we'll see with Gen Z is a lot more people running their own business freelance.
Gig economy.
Gig economy, exactly. I always make sure that somewhere in their education or mentorship that I have with them, I'm telling them, you just have to make sure you're not going to reach a limit where you have to pay HST. Make sure you know where that is. I have one uncle who has always been a small business owner. I had no example of this at all. I used to say I have not an entrepreneurial bone in my body. And I really, really thought that was true. The best way to learn how to run a business is just trial by fire. You can take business courses, you can ask friends for help, you can get a mentor. These things are all super important, but you're not going to understand how this works until you just do it. And I think it stops a lot of people from starting a business because they're like, oh, that's so far away from what I do. That's too much risk. you have to push against your assumptions of yourself. And yeah, it's really hard to be a small business, especially in a tax system like Canada, where you don't really see the benefit of owning your own business until you're a medium-sized business from a taxation standpoint. It's hard, but you can give yourself the freedom of trying new things, not having a boss, getting a little bit of time freedom, but you have to be willing to push through the uncomfortableness that comes with now you're on your own. Lots of businesses fail, and that's actually okay.
Well said. Absolutely. The world will not end if it fails. And it usually doesn't. It usually you pivot, you iterate.
You learn everything from every failed business venture too. I've been lucky that my entrepreneurial journey was slow. I don't think I ever would have done the just like quit the job and start the startup like my husband did. That's so his style. It's going so well for him. I feel like I'm a frog in hot water. If you just dropped me in that hot water, I definitely would have perished. But I got to build my business in a way that the water slowly heated up. And now I'm just used to like hot tub water.
You discovered you had all these entrepreneurial bones in your body that you didn't even know about. Avery, this has been such a great conversation. I love the arc of your story so far and all of the learning. It's been just so educational and inspiring. What is your next money conversation going to be, and who's it going to be with?
I have extended myself in my business to the point where like I work per hour for an hourly rate. My hourly rate is high based on my experience, and I'm very happy with where it's at. But that's my cap. I am working the most amount of hours I can handle working at that hourly rate. And I'm very clear that if I ever want to make any more money in my business, I need to do something different. That's not an hour of my time is this much money. Now that Jason, my husband, is making a little bit of salary, I think I have a little bit of leeway now where I can take a few hours out of that pay per hour model and figure out how do I make something that's more sustainable and still do the work that I love to do, but be home for summer with my kid while she still wants to be home for summer with me and not have to get camp for PA day. So that's probably a conversation I have to have with my husband. Let's look at our budget from here. After 3 years, we're back to 2 incomes. So how do we best leverage that so that we can be a family and spend as much time with our 7-year-old as is humanly possible? And what's become clear to me is that money gives you the power for that time freedom. So I'm really trying to figure out how to make that work.
Avery, what a beautiful conversation you're going to have. And what a beautiful conversation this has been. Thank you for that. Where's the best place for our listeners to find you?
I talk about career advice and mentorship on my Instagram channel, which is at Avery Moore Kloss. And Kloss is floss with a K instead of like Santa Claus. Or on LinkedIn. I share a lot of content on LinkedIn. So just connect with me on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Money Tales podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspirient. Go to aspirient.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@aspirient.com. See you next time.